I felt the first fist connect with my ribs before I even fully turned around, and in that split second, everything I'd learned over 23 years of martial arts came screaming back into focus. 6 of them. Drunk, aggressive, and absolutely no idea who they'd just decided to corner outside the 24-hour diner on Riverside Avenue at 2 in the morning. By the time the police arrived, 3 were already on the pavement, unable to move. 1 was crying in the parking lot, and the other 2 were backing away with their hands up, finally understanding that I wasn't the victim they'd assumed I was. But how I ended up there, alone, exhausted, working an overnight shift at a job I'd never imagined I'd take, that's the part that matters. That's the part that broke me before it made me stronger. A year before that parking lot incident, my life looked nothing like the wreckage it became. I was Ashley Mitchell, 42 years old, with a 12-year dojo in Northwest Portland and a reputation as the best combat instructor on the West Coast. My students ranged from nervous teenagers wanting to build confidence to corporate executives and law enforcement officers. I taught 3 disciplines: Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and traditional karate. And I was good at what I did. Really good. The kind of good where people drove from neighboring states to train under me. The kind of good where the local news had done a feature on me as a woman powerhouse in martial arts. I owned a modest but comfortable house in the Pearl District, a paid-off Toyota 4Runner, and enough in the bank to feel secure. More importantly, I had my independence and I guarded it like it was made of gold. My morning routine was sacred. I'd wake at 5, make strong black coffee in the same ceramic mug my father had given me before he died, a deep blue with a white crane in flight, and sit on my back porch watching the city wake up. The dojo opened at 6:30 on weekdays, and I'd spend those early morning hours planning classes, reviewing student videos, or just sitting in silence. There was something about that stillness that made me feel untouchable. My ex-husband, Marcus, used to say I was married to the dojo, and he wasn't entirely wrong. After our divorce 12 years ago, I'd learned that independence was cleaner than compromise. The dojo didn't ask me to change. The dojo didn't cheat. The dojo didn't lie. The dojo was the only relationship I needed. I had a few close friends. My best friend Jennifer worked as a therapist downtown, and we'd grab lunch once a month. I had my parents, both in their 70s, living just outside the city. I had a full life, a real life. But looking back, I realized I had become complacent. I believed that discipline and hard work and refusing to depend on anyone meant I was invulnerable. I was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. The trouble began in September, almost without me noticing it. My accountant, David Chen, called me one Thursday afternoon during a class break. "We need to talk," he'd said, his voice unusually tight. "When's good for you?" I remember feeling that first small flicker of unease, like a match strike in the dark, but I pushed it aside. I had classes to teach. "Send me an email with what you need," I'd told him, distracted. "I'll look at it this weekend." He'd emailed that night, 3 pages of concerns about unusual activity in my business account. Unusual transfers, discrepancies between what I'd reported and what the actual deposits were. I skimmed it, felt a small knot form in my stomach, and promised myself I'd call him Monday. I didn't. I told myself there had to be an explanation, a clerical error, probably something simple. Monday came and went, then Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'd managed to convince myself it wasn't actually urgent. That same week, my business partner of 8 years, Robert Hayes, came to me asking for a substantial advance on his profit share, $40,000. Robert had come to work at the dojo 3 years into my operation, and over time he'd become invaluable. He ran the front desk, managed scheduling, handled client relations, and taught 2 evening classes in kickboxing. I trusted him completely. When he asked for the money, saying it was for his daughter's college fund and he was just a bit short, I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money that afternoon. He hugged me, actually pulled me into an embrace and patted my back, and called me the best boss he'd ever had. I felt proud of myself for being generous, for being someone who could help. Another small detail that would later reveal itself to be a carefully orchestrated move in a game I didn't know I was playing. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Friday in late September, around 7 in the morning. I was alone in my office, reviewing the monthly finances on my computer, when I noticed something that made me stop mid-sip of my cooling coffee. A check had cleared that shouldn't exist. A check for $15,000 made out to cash, with my forged signature on it. The check had been deposited 3 weeks earlier. My hands went cold first, that cold that starts in your fingertips and races up your arms until your whole body feels like it's been dunked in ice water. Then came the shaking. I couldn't hold the mouse properly. I had to grip my desk just to stay seated. I opened my banking app, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, and began scrolling through the past 3 months of transactions. There were 4 more. 4 checks with my forged signature, totaling nearly $60,000. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation, that I was misunderstanding something, that this couldn't possibly be real. But I knew my own signature. I knew what I had and hadn't authorized. And I knew, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that makes you want to throw up, exactly who had done this. I stared at Robert's name on the forged checks for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. My hands stopped shaking and went cold instead. That particular kind of cold that comes with essential certainty. I printed everything, every transaction, every discrepancy, every forged signature. I made copies and put the originals in a folder I locked in my desk drawer. Then I called David Chen and told him I was coming to his office in an hour, and I needed him to have every single financial record he could access waiting for me when I arrived. The drive downtown felt like moving through water. Traffic lights seemed to take forever. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through scenarios, remembering every interaction with Robert over the past 8 years. That time he'd asked about my online banking password, saying he needed to transfer funds for the business account. I'd refused that day. Something about his tone had bothered me. But I'd given him access to the filing cabinet. I'd shown him where I kept the business checkbooks. I'd trusted him with the combination to the safe. Jesus Christ, I'd trusted him completely, and he'd been systematically stealing from me the entire time. David's office was on the 15th floor of a glass building downtown. When I walked in, he was already waiting, and I could see the worry etched into his face. He'd printed everything: bank statements, deposits, withdrawals, the entire history of my business account going back 2 years. 2 years, not 3 months. 2 full years of systematic theft. The numbers were worse than I'd thought. Robert hadn't just taken $60,000. He'd taken over $230,000. The amount was so staggering that I had to sit down in David's leather chair and put my head between my knees for a moment. "Ashley," David said carefully, pulling up a chair next to me, "I need you to look at something else." He clicked through to another file on his computer. "This account here, the one you told me you didn't recognize the transfers from? I traced it. It's registered to a shell company, but the signatory is Robert Hayes." I looked at the screen without really seeing it. He opened a fake company in my business's name and transferred the money there. Yes, and here's where it gets worse. David pulled up another document. He's been running a side business, a personal training operation, using your dojo's name and reputation. He's been advertising classes that don't exist, taking payments from people, and the money's going directly to his account. At least 20 clients have paid for memberships that were never fulfilled. The room tilted. I gripped the armrest of the chair. How many people know about this? I don't know, but I do know that you need to call the police and an attorney immediately. This is fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and wire fraud. These are federal charges, Ashley. This is serious. I nodded numbly. I called my attorney, Margaret Rossetti, from David's office. She was a shark, someone I'd used for the divorce from Marcus all those years ago. She told me to do nothing, say nothing, and come to her office immediately with all the documentation. She would handle the police report herself. The police came to Margaret's office that afternoon. 2 detectives, both professional and kind, but with that particular weariness that comes from hearing similar stories far too often. They took statements, they photographed the documents, they asked me detailed questions about my relationship with Robert and when I'd first noticed the discrepancies. One of them, Detective Morrison, a woman with gray streaking her dark hair, asked if I'd confronted Robert yet. "No," I said. I wanted everything documented first. "Good instinct," she said. "Don't confront him alone. We'll need to do that in a controlled way. We'll likely want you there, but with officers present." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my back porch in the dark, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm September night, and I drank coffee that had gone cold hours ago. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That frightened me more than the initial shock. The trembling had been honest. This stillness felt dangerous. I thought about every time Robert had asked me a question about the business finances, every time he'd offered to help with the accounting, every time he'd suggested I should delegate more and take time for myself, every time he'd given me that particular smile, the one I'd interpreted as warm and supportive, but which now looked like the smile of a predator sizing up prey. Around 4 in the morning, I got up and went to my office. I pulled out the file I kept on every student I'd ever trained. Robert was in there, his intake form from 8 years ago. His emergency contact was listed as his daughter, Michelle. Michelle, who he was always talking about. Michelle, who he'd needed $40,000 for her college fund just weeks ago. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone and searched for Michelle Hayes and Portland State University. Nothing. I searched for Michelle Hayes and Oregon State. Nothing. I searched for Michelle Hayes and the University of Oregon. Nothing. I called the college admissions offices when they opened at 9 in the morning, pretending to be a prospective student's parent, asking about my friend's daughter, who was supposed to be starting this semester. None of them had a Michelle Hayes enrolled. The last piece clicked into place. There was no daughter. There was no college fund. The $40,000 had been for him. He'd stolen it from me and claimed it was for his child. That lie, somehow, hurt worse than the theft itself. At 10 o'clock, Detective Morrison called me. "We're going to move on this today," she said. "Can you be at the dojo at 2 p.m.? We'll execute a search warrant on the premises and conduct the interview with Mr. Hayes. We'd like you there so he can't claim later that he wasn't informed of his rights or that there's confusion about ownership." I called my assistant instructor, Keisha, and told her to close the dojo at 1 p.m. for an emergency inventory. She didn't ask questions. Keisha had been with me for 5 years and knew better than to pry. At 1:45, I was standing in my office when the police arrived. Detective Morrison and her partner, a young man named Chen, came in first, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Margaret had insisted on being there, and she stood beside me, her presence solid and reassuring. Robert arrived at 2 o'clock for his regular afternoon class, completely unsuspecting. He walked through the door with his gym bag over his shoulder and his usual friendly smile, and he froze when he saw the police uniforms. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost comical. Almost. "Robert Hayes?" Detective Morrison stepped forward with her badge. "I'm Detective Morrison, Portland Police Bureau. We have a warrant to search these premises and to speak with you regarding allegations of fraud and embezzlement related to this business." I watched his face go through a series of expressions, confusion, then calculation, then something that might have been rage before he locked it down. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had changed. The warm, friendly tone was gone. What replaced it was cold. "You can cooperate here or we can do this at the station," Detective Chen said evenly. "Your choice." Robert looked at me. Our eyes met for the first time since I'd discovered the truth, and in that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time in 8 years. I saw the calculation. I saw the entitlement. I saw the kind of man who could steal from someone he worked alongside every single day and feel no remorse. He was still looking at me as though I'd betrayed him by having the audacity to notice. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," Detective Morrison replied. "But I'd suggest you cooperate. We have documentation, bank statements, forged checks, and testimony from your own phone records showing communications with the cell company you established. This is going to go very badly for you regardless, but it goes worse if you don't cooperate." The search took 3 hours. They seized his personal computer, his phone, documents from his desk, and the business checkbooks. They found evidence of the fake memberships in his email. They found screenshots of my forged signature. They found communications between Robert and a woman named Diane, who, it turned out, had been helping him run the fake business. The pieces of the puzzle kept multiplying, and each one revealed a deeper level of planning and betrayal. When they were done, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. "We're going to charge him with multiple felonies: fraud, embezzlement, forgery, identity theft, and wire fraud. We've contacted the other victims, the people who paid for fake memberships. Some of them want to press charges too. This is a strong case, Ms. Mitchell, a very strong case." After the police left, I stood alone in my dojo. The studio was silent. The mirrors reflected my image back at me, a woman I almost didn't recognize. My jaw was set. My eyes were steady. My hands were still. I looked like someone who'd made a decision. I walked to my office and locked the door. Then I sat at my desk, and I made a list of every single thing that needed to happen next. Insurance claims, client notifications, business restructuring, consultation with a business attorney about civil suits. By the time the sun set, I had a plan. By the time night fell completely, I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of Robert's downfall. The trial took 6 months. During that time, the Portland media picked up the story. Local martial arts instructor defrauded by business partner. And suddenly my dojo became infamous. Some people stopped coming because they were worried about the stability of the business. Others came specifically because they wanted to support me. The narrative shifted in my favor when the news outlets interviewed the people Robert had defrauded through the fake memberships. One woman, Sarah, had been saving for months to take self-defense classes to build confidence after a previous assault. Robert had taken her $1,500 and given her nothing. When she told that story on camera, Robert's fate was sealed. Diane, Robert's accomplice, turned state's evidence and testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She detailed how Robert had recruited her, how they'd planned the scheme together, and how he'd been stealing from me methodically and with absolute intention to defraud. Her testimony was devastating. Robert took the stand in his own defense and tried to claim that I'd been confused about the finances, that I'd given him authorization for the transfers, that this was all a misunderstanding. He looked directly at me while he lied, and I looked directly back, completely unmoved. When Margaret cross-examined him, she was surgical. She presented every forged check. She showed his bank records. She played the recorded phone call where he denied everything to the detective. She asked him, in front of the jury, why he needed a fake daughter to justify stealing $40,000 from his boss. By the time she was done with him, he was sweating and pale. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Robert's hands shook so badly he had to grip the table. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a cold, clear sense of resolution. 6 months after the conviction, I stood in my dojo on a Saturday morning, watching a new class of beginning students line up for their first lesson. The studio was full again. More full than it had been before, actually. People who'd heard my story wanted to train under someone who'd stood up, who'd fought back, who'd refused to be a victim. I'd rebuilt the business. I'd hired a new instructor, a woman named Jasmine who was brilliant and trustworthy. I'd implemented new financial controls and brought in an outside accountant to review everything quarterly. The dojo was stronger than it had ever been. My father called that evening. "Proud of you, daughter," he said simply. "For what?" I asked, though I knew. "For not breaking. For not giving up. For turning it into something better." I held my father's blue ceramic mug, the one with the white crane, and I thought about that woman who'd sat on this back porch 6 months ago, drinking cold coffee at 4 in the morning, wondering if her life would ever make sense again. That woman had been afraid. This woman wasn't afraid anymore. That woman had believed in people. This woman believed in people still, but more carefully, with her eyes open. That woman had thought that hard work and discipline and independence made you invulnerable. This woman knew better now. She knew that vulnerability was inevitable, but surrender was always a choice, and she'd chosen differently. I took a long sip of the fresh coffee. It was hot. It was bitter. It was exactly what I needed. And for the first time in a long time, the bitterness tasted like strength.